right, let's see. So we had been talking about communicating with Mongo. We created a simple database in Mongo. We called it Whiteboard cs5200 sp20. And we first interacted with it using the Mongo client for interacting with the non-relational database. And then after spending a day or so interacting with the database directly from the console, we started exploring the use of the library Mongoose, which allows us to connect and interact with the non-relational database programmatically. We talked about being able to create schemas, and in these schemas we could declare the structure of the data that we were interacting with, right, and connect to a particular collection in that database. We declared it in its own file so that it could be reused from other places in the application. We had to export it so that we could then reuse it and implement a model. This model it's a Mongoose model that allows us to it allows us to implement the some of the low-level generic functions that allows us to interact with the database. So, for instance, it declares functions such as create, declares the functions such as find, and all those, right? And then we can then use that model to wrap that Mongoose model, wrap it in higher level functions that make it, provide a nicer API for the rest of the application. And indeed we did. We created a couple functions. We call it create user, find all users, and you would have all the the regular common functions that you would expect to implement all the CRUD operations. Now we can still, once we declared all these functions, we exported it as an API so that other functions outside can require those models and then access those functions from outside and then make those calls. We also talked about that all the communication from our programs to the non-relational database all the communications are asynchronous, so that any call with these create functions, right? All these implementations, what they return, these are all like implicit returns. These are this function is returning whatever this create function does, and what it returns are promises that allow us to, the return of this function here is a promise that allows us to register for a callback, a function for a callback, saying, hey, once you get the data back, right? I want to get the response back from the database, and then I can do whatever I want with it. In this case, I'm just spitting it out to a command line, and then we saw that one of the challenges in when you're trying to interact with asynchronous communication is that you tend to have these multiple nested queries that because you're trying to synchronize the access, right, to happen in a particular sequence, and to deal with that challenge, what we did is that we instead when we nest the queries, right, we return them so that you can then use it using this syntax that makes it easier to read. Otherwise, you end up with lots and lots of nested calls, which are much harder to read. Anyway, so this is where we left off. Let's keep going a little bit further. Actually, no, let's try running this. Make sure that this is still working. Let's see. Let's see if we have Mongo running. Okay, it looks like we don't. So let's get Mongo running here. And the way we could do that is by running mongod, and we can provide the data path and tell it what directory we want to have the database store. Let's see. There we go. So we have Mongo up and running. I don't know if you could see that. Let me interrupt me if you can't see. In a separate tab, let's run the Mongo client, and let's verify that indeed we have. We have some databases here. So we can say show DBs. There it is. So there's the whiteboard database. So we can copy that and we can say use that database. And in that database, we can show what collections we might have already in there. We have some sections, we have some users, and we can run this, to see that indeed we can execute and communicate with it by running our main function over here, right? So our main function is this one over here. So we can run it either from the terminal. We do that. We can say node main. Are we in the right place? I don't know if you can see that's pretty small. We can just say node main. And there it is. So it looks like it's working, right? It created some content. Looks like we've created Helen several times. Yeah, we created Helen like 3 times at least, right? And the data is there. And we can verify it with Mongo. We can say db.users.find .pretty, and we can verify that the data that we're retrieving through Mongo is indeed the same data that is already stored in the database. So yeah, perfect. Okay, so this is where we left off last time we met. Let's keep going.